Hello everyone. So, as some of you may know, I recently acquired a 3D printer. Mentioned it in my last video. And what I said then, and this is the first video that I'm going to do on the subject in a new playlist. I'm going to make a new playlist. I'm principally going to use the 3D printer for my wargaming hobby, but not entirely for that. I've thought of some other uses for it already. So this new playlist is going to mainly be of interest to wargamers, but at the same time, 3D printing is really taking off in a lot of hobbies. Model railways, remote control cars and remote control boats and so on. Lots of other areas as well. So there might be some people out there who are interested in watching my videos just on the subject of 3D printing and my experiences with it. So I thought I'd put it in a separate playlist so that those people can just select those particular videos rather than having to trawl through all my wargaming videos. So this is the first model that I have both printed and painted. It's not the first model that I've printed. I've shown you some of those already. I'll show you them again in a moment. But this is the first one that I've actually printed up and completed. And it's a small paddle steamer for the American Civil War, which I printed in 15mm scale, and I'm really pleased with it. It's one of the files that I purchased from a company called Nazhevitz Modelbau. I gave you a link to that on my last video, but I'll put another one on this description of this video as well. So far I've been purchasing mainly files from that company, or getting some free downloads and things from Thingiverse. I have got my eye on some other commercial companies as well that I might get some of their files later on. But I've started off with Nazhevitz Modelbau. I've bought up quite a lot of their files. I've got all their America files now, so they're in three groups. There's French Indian Wars up to the American Civil War, there's the American Civil War itself, and then there's the Wild West, so a sort of slightly later period. But a lot of the files of models in those particular categories are interchangeable. I've found a lot of useful stuff in the French Indian War to ACW that I'll be able to use for ACW. And all the files for this company are scaled at sort of 20mm to 22mm. So there's quite a simple formula. If you want a 15mm model such as this one, there's quite a simple formula. You just reduce it down by 73%. If you wanted it as 28mm, you take it up by 127%. And I am thinking of doing something with this model because I printed it out primarily just to see if I could do it, if I could, it's in various segments, so to make sure that I could assemble it all, put it all together, see how I got on basically. And then I was thinking of making a 28mm version and altering it slightly, not having the heavy artillery and mortars and so on it, and the sandbags, and maybe using it as a colonial era steamboat for something like Congo, or keep the sandbags and use it for if I ever get around to modelling the Sudan and Khartoum, that kind of thing. It would be, suitable for that. So this is one of the things I'm finding about 3D printing. On my last video, I seem to put a lot of people off, particularly about the the mess that the resin causes and the caution you have to take with the resin. But I really don't want to put people off. I basically want to give you a kind of candid impression of what it's all about, because it's not a suitable thing for some people to take up. For me, it's absolutely perfect in what I want to get out of it. But there are downsides to it. There are pros and cons. So I don't want to I don't want to paint it entirely in sort of rosy hue. I want to show you some of the pitfalls and the downside, which I'm going to do. But yeah, this is so exciting for me to be able to source things that are not necessarily readily available for the wargamer. Most of the models of steamboats that I've ever seen have been scratch built. I'm not really aware of any commercially available models. And I'm not very good at scratch building, so to be able to kind of just print up this and have it ready for a game is wonderful. And as I say, I've purchased a lot of files from Najovitz Model Bar, not just the Americas, and there's so much in them, things that I'm definitely interested in. Printing and playing with that I've never been able to find before, and that is one of the massive advantages of 3D printing. It's that availability of hard to source and unique models, and also to be able to adjust the scale to your figures rather than having to kind of compromise and find a sort of a building that might not necessarily fit with the size of your figures. You can hone it perfectly to the dimensions you want. So apart from the Americas files, I've got so far. I've got Age of Pirates. I've got some unpainted pirates, but I've never wargame pirates. But now it makes me want to kind of print some of these models up and paint my pirates up and start playing pirate games. But I've got those. I've got that for basically just as an archive now. I can, whenever I want, I can get going with printing those. So they're there, and it's almost like hoarding without taking up the space, if you know what I mean. I so often I buy things just because I like the look of them, and I think, I'll definitely war game that one day, and then they just fill boxes and take up space. But this is a sort of digital way of having it there ready and available without actually consuming any space. So I've got Age of Pirates. I've got North Africa. I forget what it's called precisely. But it's North African buildings, so it includes a French Foreign Legion fort and a lot of Arab style village buildings, things like that. But it's also got some World War II related. It's got the railway station at El Alamein and things like that. So it kind of crosses across quite a few time periods. The Arab buildings are almost timeless. I printed one of those up, so I'll show you that in a minute. I got an ancient Rome one. Again, I have got 15mm Imperial Roman army, so a lot of the things are going to be suitable for that. And another one as well that slipped my mind at the moment, but there's an awful lot more there to digest, so I'm going to sort of pick them up slowly over the months. So they do an awful lot of World War II stuff. They've got about 6 separate files of World War II stuff. So I'm really impressed by Najovitz Model Bau. And the other thing about them, that I should go on to saying, is that most of the parts most of the models have been designed to print straight from the build plate of the printer without the need for supports. Now, having said that, I have found that you do need, on occasion, to put some supports onto the model before you run it through the slicing software and actually slice it. That's because it is I find it incredibly difficult to remove some of these things from the build plate. You really have to apply a lot of force to get them off on occasion, and the finer, smaller parts will break, definitely break. For instance, the artillery piece, which is separate to the files for the steamer. They do 6 different. They just describe them as guns, but the artillery piece is all in sort of separate parts. So the actual circular ring of the rail that the gun swivels and pivots on would actually be attached to the plate, and you'd have to scrape it off with a sort of spatula type thing, and it's so kind of slender that you're going to break it as you scrape it off. So it's much easier to kind of and very easy to do. You just program in a kind of platform and then supports coming off of it that lift the ring off of the build plate, and then all the pressure that you're applying to remove the model from the build plate is applied to that platform, and it doesn't matter if you crack it or chip it. And the supports themselves you break off before you do the final curing of the resin, so that they're still pliable and they will come away really easily. You can take them off with your, just by brushing your thumb across them. So that's what I found is a much easier way of doing it. To give you an idea, though, this section here, the roof here with the stack and the wheelhouse, I did actually print that up and have trouble getting it off the build plate with this particular version, and as you can see, it cracked. I don't know if you can see that, but it cracked right the way across into 2 parts as I was trying to ease it off of the build plate, and it glued back together perfectly, and probably that fissure would be hidden once you painted it. But I thought, having glued it together, I thought, well, why not just have another go, print it again? This is what you can do. Obviously it's a bit wasteful on resin, and this is one of the things that I am finding this whole thing quite wasteful in resin, and therefore quite expensive. I think you have to kind of forget about this idea that having got the printer and the files, you're going to be saving money. I don't think you are, to any great extent. It's going to be many years before I get my initial investment in the printer back in terms of saving on models, and I think the value of the printer, as I say, is in being able to print up unusual items, and also to be able to print them up to conform with your wargaming armies and so on. And the other thing about the idea that these models can be printed up without any supports is that it doesn't do any harm to add supports to it. So, for instance, you can probably see there's a little bit of kind of almost like tearing on the paddle there, and I had several goes at printing the paddle, and every time you get this sort of sagging. Now, I didn't at the time. I just didn't think about adding supports to it. I just put the best one on the model. But had I printed that on the build plate, where it's actually suspended in a resin printer, it's actually suspended. But had I just sort of raised it away from the build plate a little bit, and then put a raft there with some supports going down, I'm pretty sure that would have avoided that kind of error there. So this is the other thing, that you have to sort of try again, and same thing that does use up the resin, so it's not very economical, really, in terms of cost effectiveness, but you really can sort of do some fantastic things with it. I think the detail on that, this is 15mm again, remember, the detail on that model of the artillery piece, is pretty good. It's as good, if not better, than a lot of metal, and probably about, I don't know, it's like a good kind of plastic company. But, can you get it in plastic, and can you get it in every scale that you might require it in? So I've been messing about, trying various things out. These are a lot of, as I say, 6 different guns. Those 2 are the same, I think, as the one that is on the steamer. This is a different one here, but this one is sort of case in point, really, that it didn't print particularly well, because I had it attached to a platform without any supports. It was attached directly to the platform, and then it's hard to break it away from the platform. Much easier to break it off of supports, and the gun was attached directly to the build plate, so the very end of the muzzle actually remained on the let's see, I have trouble working this out. I think it remained on the filament. I think it's got a filament on the FEP rather than staying on the build plate, so I lost the end of the muzzle. So you get failures like that, but now I'm working out what to do. It's getting much easier. So for instance, I've never been able to find chevaux de frise for the American Civil War, and these were actually in the French Indian Wars to ACW files, so they're not in the ACW files. But they basically print up as 2 halves, and then you glue them together. That was quite difficult because they do tend to bend as they cure. So I had to sort of glue the middles in place first of all, and then the ends, holding the ends together with clothes pegs to keep them, together as the glue dried. But I don't think they're bad at all. They're going to do fine as, on the battlefield once I've painted them up. And as I say, I've never been able to find, maybe there are some out there, I don't know. But if there are, I don't think there will be many that are going to be that crisp. Same thing though, that basically it's the sort of half of the main beam that's attached to the plate. So if you weren't to raise it up and give it supports, most of these would break as you tried to scrape them off the the build plate. So this is what I did. A simple click of a button in the software, and it will program in a kind of platform like this, and then the supports go up and attach themselves to that central beam, and then you can literally just peel it off and so it saves doing any damage to that. So that's one example, the kind of thing you can do, but the care you have to take to be successful. I've got loads of other stuff here, so I'll just show you each one individually just to give you an idea, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about my feelings about the resin and so on. Just my feelings. I'm not going to give you advice because I'm not an expert or anything, it's just going to be my opinion. So I've already shown you, so I'll just very briefly show you these two again. There's the 15mm Church from that's from the Wild West file. There's the Dunker Church from the ACW. Now again, this Dunker Church, I have got a model of it, but it's no longer commercially available. That was produced by JR Miniatures. But you certainly can't get a lot of the buildings that they've got in their files nowadays. They've got loads of the buildings at Gettysburg. They've got the one at, what was it called? Seven Pines, was it? The twin kind of houses at Seven Pines, that kind of thing. They're very hard to get hold of, and you might be able to find them, say, in 15mm, but then not be able to find them in 28. So if you were, say, putting a game on, this is another good example of the use of a 3D printer. If you were a club member and your club was going to put a game on at a show or something like that, and you wanted to do Gettysburg in 28mm, if someone had a 3D printer and you purchased those files, you'd be able to print all of the buildings up. You'd obviously have to do it in sections, but over the course of a year, you could do that amongst a group of club members, and then put a really kind of special game on. And that doesn't just apply to ACW; it applies to anything. This is I might have to zoom out a little bit now. This is one of the Arrow buildings from the North Africa range. So it's 4 parts, but I was thinking I would glue them together, but I'm not so sure I need to worry too much about gluing together because they seem to sit fairly flush. There's a roof, an upper floor, a lower floor, and a staircase. There was a fault. It did develop a bit of a fault on this lower floor here, so you can see there's a bit of a kind of rip there, but that's not going to be too difficult to repair. It doesn't matter too much that the door doesn't meet the floor. It just looks a bit shabby, which is what you might expect. This area here, I am going to fill it in, but it's actually going to be, a lot of it's going to be concealed by the staircase anyway, so all you're actually going to see is that. So all you really need to do is just fill in that little bit there. So that, I didn't bother to reprint that or anything. I'm perfectly happy with that. I printed lots of bits that I'm not going to use necessarily, just to see how, what they look like. So I wasn't too happy with the way, this is the back of the small paddle steamer that I showed you before. I wasn't too happy about the way that it kind of was raised up there, and thought that was a fault of mine, but it is actually like that. So I printed 2 of these unnecessarily, but I also wanted to compare how it matched the large paddle steamer, because I was thinking about trying to kind of piece together a small paddle steamer with side paddles rather than the rear paddle. So this is a section from the large paddle steamer, and as you can see, it's exactly the same width, but unfortunately the cabins and the deck structures and that are a different height. So even though this is the section to which you would attach the side paddles in the large paddle steamer, it's not going to be possible to put together a small paddle steamer, using bits from both. And you can't even reduce down the number because it's very long as well. And unfortunately, a lot of the lengthwise sections do need to kind of marry up with one another. You can see there, and there's only half a door there, so you couldn't sort of shorten the steamer by just putting the front on there, because it would look odd with half a door. But there you go. The steamer also comes with a steam engine, but I didn't bother to put that in the end. There were a couple of other things. The sandbags, I printed a couple of those up just because, just to fill the space in on the build plate, basically. So I've got those if I ever do another 15mm, or you could use them for something else. For the Wild West set, I'm not gonna use any resin buildings for my Dead Man's Hand project, because I'm perfectly happy with the MDF buildings I've got. I've got that mainly for the the crossover with the ACW, and also because I am slowly getting armies together for Peter Pig's 15mm game Western, so I'll be able to use the buildings for that. But I did print up, this is from the Wild West file, and I printed these up as 28mm, and they are store items from the general store. So these are fairly generic, really. I'll be able to use them as cover in Dead Man's Hand, but they would do barrels, aren't they? I could use those for a whole host of situations. And the others are just sort of bales of something, I don't know what, but again, useful in lots of different settings. From the Roman files, I've printed up, not very much so far, just some tents. I was thinking about making a camp, a supply camp for my Roman army, so I could use it for something like FOG or DBA or whatever. So I got some marching tents and lots of palisades. The palisades, as you can probably see, some of them have got this tear in them, and some haven't, and some have just got small tears. So that has to be something, I'm going to come back to this has to be something to do with the quality of the plate at and the film at the actual spot where it's printing, because you can see this one came out fine without any fault on it at all, as did this one. This one's got a very small one, so I'm going to come back. This is a bit worrying in a way, so I'm going to come back to that in a moment. And finally, not from Nazhevitz Model Bau, I got this completely free to download on Thingiverse. Thingiverse is a bit odd because some people download files and then set it up so that you can tip them. So it's a bit like something like Patreon or something like that on YouTube, that they can make a little bit of cash from it. But a lot of people don't bother to even set the tipping thing up. They just put it there, and because they've built something and they think it'd be kind to sort of share it with other people. So that's precisely what this guy did. He wanted some Draken for the Wings of War game. Couldn't find any, so he designed his own. And I've since I saw this, I've purchased on eBay a copy of the box Draken's Burning, is it, or Draken's Falling? And I'm going to print up a few of these. So this comes in four parts. There is the rear section, a front section. The rear section, he's got the plain one, and he's also got one that has got the what do they call it, like the Balkan cross, the German kind of iron cross type thing, to mark it as a German Draken. Or he's got a roundel that you can paint up as British or French or whatever you want. But I've just gone for the plain one. So it's got a front and a back, and it's got a sort of cylinder that in theory fits into there, but it's a bit tight at the moment because this sort of area here is just a sort of a layer to connect it to the bill plate, to make sure it sticks to the bill plate and not to the film and prints properly. So that hole there has a sort of rim that would need to sort of file off before that would fit in there, but then that acts as a sort of pin holding the front and back together. But I don't think it's really too crucial. And then there's a basket as well, which hangs. He fell over. Hangs from the bottom. Now, this is where I began to have issues when I printed these up. The resin is really expensive. I'm going to show you a bottle of it in a moment. Well, let's show you a bottle now. So there's a bottle of resin. This is a litre bottle. This costs £54. It's quite an expensive type of resin. I mean, I think you can probably get resin for £24-25 or so, the cheapest. So it's quite an expensive one, but all the same, if you were to print that solidly, look at how much resin you're actually using. So this part alone is probably about £15 worth of resin, just in that alone. And I was beginning to get failures, so you can, after about an hour, you can see enough of the underside of the build plate to see whether it's taking or not and whether it's going to be a success. So you don't have to carry on printing it, for a couple of hours. You can kind of cancel the print. But all the same, every time you fail, you're wasting resin. And even if you're successful, you're using up a lot of resin for this entire model, It's a lot of resin. So the way you get around that is to hollow it out. So again, very easy to do, very simple to do. So I did that with this one. And I was under the impression when I first printed this that the software seemed to give me a view. I'll show you now, this side here. It gave me that view. So what this particular software that I'm using does, it gives you the opportunity to infill it. So I infilled it, give it a bit more structure and support with this sort of hexagonal support. But then, when it came out the printer, it actually had a solid bottom to it, like this. So I had to saw off the bottom of it. And when I did that, it was just full of resin. So you've got this issue that you're not supposed to, or definitely don't, contact the resin with your skin. It's spilling out onto my worktop and so on, so I've got to try and contain it. And because I hadn't drilled, sawn this off properly, I then had to drill holes, because I thought, well, I bet there's resin in all these other compartments underneath here. So I drilled holes through it, and sure enough, a lot more resin poured out. So I was under the impression that what would happen is this is the part that's attached to the. I'll show you on this one. It's a bit easier to get in frame. I was under the impression that this would be attached to the build plate. So my hand is the build plate, and it's dipping in and out of the resin tank. And until it gets to the very bottom, that whole cavity won't be sealed off. So in other words, as it lifts up, the resin is kind of glooping out. But I think what happened was because the build plate didn't raise it quite high enough to completely remove from the tank of resin, the resin was remaining in there because of air pressure and so on. So it was filling with a column of resin. So even though I had taken the trouble to hollow this out, I didn't actually save myself any resin on doing it. And what you are supposed to do is punch holes with the software into the model. And that allows resin to run out. Now, whether it runs out after you printed and you simply kind of drain it out the holes, or whether it will run out during the printing process, I'm not so sure. I suppose it depends partly on where you put the holes. But this is the other problem, that some of the some software, and the one I'm using doesn't do this, some will also print a plug that matches the hole that you programmed to go in, so that you can, after you've printed and cured the model, you can then put the plug in and fill the gap. I haven't worked out how to do that on my software, and I don't think it's possible. But the other thing that now occurs to me as well is if you are going to infill with this hexagonal structure, then every one of these hexagonal columns is an individual structure. So it's going to require a communicating hole between all of those in order to get the to get all the resin out. So I've switched now. What I'm going to do now is try and print some up without the infill, and just put a couple of holes in the bottom here, so that this, so that I can drain the resin out quite easily just by doing that, and do away with the hexagonal fill. So there's quite a lot of the Najovitz Modelbau stuff. It's all been pre-considered. If you do need to use supports on any of his files, he will tell you, but with the stuff you get on Thingiverse, you do have to use a little bit more, you do have to plan it a little bit more carefully. And then, so what I did with this one is just print solid, that is just solid resin, because it was equally wasteful, whichever way I went about it. But then you do get this issue now. I'm beginning to find I'm getting increasingly more and more failed prints and things, and I'm going to show you why I think that is. But when I printed this one, I was trying to print two, and only one of them succeeded. The other one just, it started attaching to the film rather than to the build plate. So this was lifting up, and there was a circular residue when I emptied the resin vat. There was a circular residue on the film of the vat. I think it's, as I say, I think it's called an FEP. So that can only, this is what worries me now, that can only be down. It's obviously not a fault of the slicing software or the design of the model. It can only be down to flaws in the printer itself. The filament being abrased, or and the resin preferring to attach to the film rather than to the model as it's being printed. That is causing me some concern that I'm going to talk about in a moment. But in terms of the software, this is something else that I have found, is that my printer is quite a new printer. It's the Anycubic Photon Mono X, and it has a very large build plate, large dimension build plate. All 3D printers come with a memory stick which has slicing software on them, and you can access and download for free slicing software on the internet. A lot of people use software called Chitubox, but you have to be, when you do that, you have to enter into the software in your sort of settings, file, the dimensions of your build plate. And most software, including Chitubox, seem to be, they only have a list of options for certain types of printer. Which is another reason why I've gone for the software that comes with my printer, that I've simply got it's from Anycubic, and I've simply got to select the Anycubic Photon Mono X, and it's got the build plate dimensions in there correctly. But the other aspect of it is, I think you have to be careful if you're using software that is actually designed for use with, I forget what they call them now, but the sort of gantry style printers that print from the bottom up rather than having the build plate, rather than printing in resin, it's using a kind of plastic thread that it melts, because the supports are going to act differently depending on whether they're acting as a suspension or as a support, because gravity is going to have a different effect. Now that struck me. Wargamers Anonymous said that he preferred to use Prusa 3D, I think it is. Now all the Prusa's printers they're not resin printers, and I did have a look at it. I'd managed to download it, and I couldn't factor in the printer that I was using anyway, the printer that I have anyway. But it does. So in other words, I couldn't find a way of actually manually putting in the dimensions of my build plate either. So the Prusa slicer software isn't suitable for me. But I think even if you could find a setting in there that matched your own printer, I think you have to be careful, because it's when it does this sort of automatic support option, it's going to do it on the assumption that the models are sitting on the build plate. So I think that's just something you have to take into consideration. Now, as I say, I'm beginning to get a little bit worried, so I don't want to put people off. But I am going to give you, some of the things you have to take into consideration. So, in terms of safety and the resin, this is only my opinion again. So I'm not suggesting, that you treat the resin sensibly, but I'm beginning to think this isn't Novichok. If it was that dangerous, you wouldn't be able to obtain it. There on the label there are various sort of cautionary icons. Keep away from sunlight. Fair enough. I have found that it does cure very quickly if it's a sunny day. You have to keep so don't expose it to sunlight during the daytime if you can avoid it, or especially not for too long. Shake well before use. That's not even a safety advice. Using good ventilation. Now, reading around this and reading various sort of opinions and so on again. Some people say there is a problem with what they describe as nanoparticles. So you do have to have good ventilation. But the same applies as, say, if you're using a rattle can indoors. I mean, I definitely never do that. I always prime my models outside. I do varnish some things indoors with the window open, mainly because I don't like to varnish outside and then find that the varnish needed to be brushed off in a particular area, or there's something from the outside like dust or grit that's found its way onto the model and attached. So I do tend to kind of varnish indoors using keeping the window open maybe. But then when I've sort of read things or listened to the YouTube channels and so on, a lot of people have said that there's really no difference between, having this exposed to the air. You're not actually using it in a kind of aerosol way. So it's only going to be very small particles that are in the air, and they're probably less harmful to you than, say, definitely than cigarette smoke, but than, say, vaping, something like that. So all this sort of really sort of fierce rhetoric about taking care to wear a mask and so on. It doesn't say wear a mask. It actually tells you to wear safety gloves and to wear safety glasses. Now, the glasses I can understand more, because if you were to splash it, and I have occasionally, especially trying to get things off of the build plate, you do find that if you use too much force in it and it leaps off or something, splashes can kind of fly off. If you were to get a splash of it in your eyes, then you would have to wash it off with immediately with warm water and sort of some kind of solution. Get it out your eyes entirely, because the moment it's exposed to too much UV light, it's going to begin to cure, and you're going to end up with a hardened film on your eyeball, which you don't want. It'd be worse than having a cataract, because it would be opaque, so you would lose your sight in that particular part of your eye. And I'm pretty sure this is the same reason that you should wear safety gloves. It's because if you get it on your skin, it's going to work as a kind of phototoxic kind of irritant, that the minute the sunlight gets on it, a lot of plants have this in their sap, that if you get the sap of certain plants on your skin, and then you're out in the sunlight, it's going to heat up, it's going to chemically react and start to cure, and then it's going to give you rashes and irritation and so on. So yeah, you have to be careful with it. But I mean, if you're a gardener, no different, say, than handling a euphorbia, something like that, which has that milky sap inside it that you definitely don't want to get on your skin. So that's the kind of precautions. But I was watching a video recently on YouTube, and it's quite a good channel. But watching it, I was kind of aware of, the sort of differences in approach to the resin, because he wasn't wearing glasses, he wasn't wearing a mask, but he would wear gloves. And I asked him a couple of questions, and he said at one time he used to actually stir the resin with his fingers, with his naked hands, and he started getting really bad migraines. Didn't mention having any skin conditions or anything like that. So I asked him, well, what's the sort of process of that actually happening? How do you absorb resin through your skin into your bloodstream that then somehow starts to give you headaches and migraines, rather than causing you organ damage, which on this site, that is the one thing it does say. It has the potential to cause organ damage. Doesn't say which organs. I think that is a really kind of extreme possibility. Again, I'm saying this is my feeling about it. I said surely breathing in these sort of small particles is more likely, to, give you headaches rather than soaking it in through your skin. And he said, oh no, from what I've read, there is absolutely no risk whatsoever from, breathing in any of the resin fumes. So there you go. It says using good ventilation. There's a guy who's, he's quite a seasoned 3D printer saying, don't worry about wearing a mask. He's more worried about wearing gloves. And I've seen on another channel, I use latex gloves. On another channel, I've seen a comment that latex gloves don't help at all. You need to wear nitrile gloves. And again, it takes you back to this, aspect of, well, why do you need to worry about the resin going through your skin, getting it onto your skin? I can understand, but why do you need to worry about it going through your skin? And there's no, on this website and the data sheet for this company, there is absolutely nothing to say that it's a problem if you actually get it in under your skin. It's getting it on your skin that's the problem. My big issue with the resin is this whole business about it being expensive, it being extremely wasteful, and once you've done the printing, it's really kind of a mess to try and clean up your the resin vat and so on. This guy that I was sort of communicating with, I said to him, well, what? Surely all the kitchen towel that you're using, surely that's contaminated with raw resin as well. And he sort of said, well, I put it all out on the windowsill to cure before I throw it away. It's just I use yards and yards of kitchen towel every time I do a 3D print. And it's just not, it's not practicable to leave it hanging around on my windowsills and things while it cures for a day or so. But again, here, this is another thing about the harm this can do to the environment rather than anyone else. Now, you definitely shouldn't pour resin or an alcohol wash or a detergent wash that's got raw resin in it down the sink, because it is harmful to the marine life. That is no different again. So it comes back to this whole thing about people stressing the harmful nature of resin. That is absolutely no different from pouring paint down the drain. You're not supposed to pour emulsion paint. If you've been decorating and you've got half a jar left, you are supposed to dispose of that responsibly. And again, separate it out in your waste and take it to a dedicated, I don't think they recycle it, but a suitable place to dispose of it. So from my point of view, I certainly don't pour anything down the drain, but it doesn't worry me that I might be putting uncured resin into my general waste. And the reason for that is that I can afford to be a little bit more casual about it where I live in Plymouth, because we don't have a landfill kind of waste disposal here in Plymouth. There's a highfalutin newfangled incinerator here, and all general waste isn't inspected at all. It's just immediately placed into this massive furnace and burnt in a very environmentally guarded way. There's all kinds of circuits and things to stop anything escaping into the air, and everything, all the harmful, things are extracted before it actually gets to the chimney. All kinds of filters and that sort of thing. So everything is burnt, and it generates warm water, and it generates power and electricity, which supplies the local dockyard. It's been built on the naval dockyard land, and the Ministry of Defence, as a sort of payback, I get free electricity for the Navy and for the ships and for the dockyard and the workings in the dockyard itself. So that's my feelings about the resin. So here you can see in this rather gloopy jar. This is a jar of alcohol with resin that has washed off of the models as I've been washing them in my wash and cure, and it's been sat on my windowsill now about a week and a half, and you can see how a lot of the alcohol is evaporated off, and it's been curing in the sunlight each day and settling on the bottom. And in theory, what you could do, here you can see, I don't know if I'll get this in camera, but here you can see a much larger, this is an old jug from a water filter, and this is a lot more alcohol solution in here, and the resin is slowly settling on the bottom, and I'll be able to pour this off, sort of distill it off, as it were. Not distill it, I'm not going to heat it up. Just drain it off, just siphon it off, leaving the gloop at the bottom, which I can then dispose of. And this alcohol I can then reuse. So that's just to give you an idea of how you go about it. But if you aren't in an area like Plymouth, you definitely need to make sure that the resin is cured before you get rid of it, because the actual uncured resin is a lot more harmful to marine life. I mean, the plastic is going to be harmful to marine life as well. So it's something that we should really be using less plastic than more, but definitely be as environmentally aware as you can be. That's another thing when I mentioned about, I made that slip up of saying I was going to distill it, heat it up. Sunlight is quite warming, and if you were to have this in a sealed container, I think that would probably cause you a problem as well, because the alcohol vapours would have nowhere to escape to, and you're potentially creating a sort of bomb, aren't you? If you were to put a naked light to it. So I've made sure that I've left the lid off of my container. So you do have to be a little bit careful. But on this whole thing about the difficulty of getting models detached from the plate and so on, I want to show you, this is the damage that I've already done. I don't know if it is damage, but I think you can see there on the bottom of the resin tank, there are areas there where the resin has sort of got attached, and I can't for the life of me get that off. And it does actually, as I run my finger over it now, it does feel dimpled, and even more alarmingly, on the other side, it feels like there's a slight small recess there. So I have definitely damaged the film at that point. You might be able to see other areas, I don't know if you can, where even very kind of gentle lifting of things that have stuck to the You know, this, I think it's called an FVP, might be wrong in that. You know, it does leave this very, very small kind of marks and so on. And the problem you have, immediately you start getting that, and unfortunately right in the centre, because that's where I've been doing most of my printing, the minute you start to get that, there is a greater potential for the cured resin layer not to stick to the build plate. When it does stick to the build plate, oh boy, is it difficult to get off. Or it can be. And that part there that I showed you before, really had to almost hammer away at it to get it off. Damaged the spatula. You know, it was really hurting my wrist and arm to try and get it off. Damaged the sort of spatula, bent it, and had to keep bending it back. So at the moment it's kind of at that angle, but at one stage it was way over here. And again, it does start to scratch the build plate, and the amount of force I had to use in the end to get something off, I've even got it even took a little sliver of metal out of the build plate. So again, this is going to be another issue, because you know, models aren't going to adhere to that build plate. So I've already sent off for some replacement film. Wasn't it terribly easy to do, because this, as I say, this is only a recently released 3D printer, and I think they're coming from China, and they cost, I had to pay £19 for two of them, and I think it's not going to be easy. There will be a way of detaching it from the tank and replacing it, but I'm not looking forward to doing that. But this is a lot more worrying, because you know, this is a substantial piece of steel or whatever it is, and I haven't seen any replacements available anywhere on the internet. But I'm just going to keep going with printing and see what how I get on, and whether it does become a major issue. So my next aim is to print up a couple of more of these, glue them all together, and start playing a game of Burning Dragons. So again, I'll just reiterate, I don't want to put people off. I want to give them a kind of candid view. I'm really excited to get into 3D printing. It's got all kinds of possibilities, and it's really got my mind running on future wargaming projects as well. So it's another part of that butterfly kind of syndrome that we all have, that the moment new possibilities open up, you get excited about them. So I don't want to put people off. I think 3D printing has a great future, especially it seems ideal for wargaming, but it has a great future for a lot of hobbies. But wargamers should really be paying attention to it now, I think, because it is going to be a major part of the hobby, as well as being a hobby in itself. But especially with the kind of cost and mess, possible kind of safety issues, and the destructibility of certain of the parts, I think you've got to kind of weigh all these in the balance. For me, the balance shifts definitely in terms of pressing on and seeing what I can do with it, but it might put some people off, but I don't want to put people off. Anyway, that's the first in the new playlist. Certainly be putting up more in the future. Hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you on the next video. Bye for now.